Welcome to Around the Writer's Table, a podcast focusing on the crossroads of creativity, craft, and conscious living for writers of all ages and backgrounds. Your hosts are Gina, Melody, and Kimbu, three close friends and women of a certain age who bring to the table their eclectic backgrounds and unique perspectives on the trials, tribulations, and the joys of writing. So pull up a chair and get comfortable here around the writer's table.
Welcome back to Around the Writer's Table, and we're so glad that you're here to join us today for this particular episode. If you're a regular listener, you know the topic, or maybe if you just read the title, that we're going to be talking about burnout in this episode. This is one that's really topical. It's something that I think not just Gina and Melody and I have heard a lot of people talking about, are experiencing ourselves. Maybe it's just the vibe of 2022. I don't know, but it's going around. And it's really an important issue for creatives, particularly because, it's one of those things, we're going to go into this in detail, but it's one of those things where, sometimes you just can't power through these things. Sometimes you got to use little tricks and wily ways. So we're going to talk about what is burnout, how it affects you as a creative, and solutions, possible solutions, things you can try. I, of course, am Kimbu York. I am both the author alchemist and the task mistress. I'm like a superhero. I have many identities, but I'm actually a romance novelist and former project manager who helps writers and solopreneurs find time, mojo, and motivation to create. So those are some big issues that I like to help people with. My other co-hosts, I have Gina Hogan Edwards, author and editor and documentation writer. She's been through a lot of things. She's currently hosts both the Women Writing for Change Facebook group and the Women Speak Circle Leader, which I'm sure she'll get to talking about in a little bit. She is passionate about supporting women and finding their voices on the page and from the stage. So she's got a lot going on.
Hello, everybody. I love your idea of we're superheroes. We do a lot of different things.
We do. And in that vein, we've got Melody A. Scout, who also wears many different heroic capes, a landscape designer, plant spirit medicine healer, author. She does a lot. And so she helps her clients find their sense of home by restoring balance and harmony to their lives through plant spirit medicine. And her book, Soul of the Seasons, which is a major part of our podcast as a whole. And in a second, we're going to have Melody talk a little bit about that and give you guys some background on what Soul of the Seasons is and the aspects and the paradigm that I'm not explaining it well. She's going to explain it a lot better than I am. And then we'll turn the topic over to talking about burnout. So Melody, do you want to give our listeners a little bit of background on the 5 seasons as we're using it here as a paradigm for helping creators with their creative life?
Sure, Kimbu, thanks a lot. And I got really excited about the 5 seasons that I talked about in my book. They're based on 5 element medicine, which is a component of Chinese medicine, and it is a dynamic, subtle yet powerful way of creating balance and harmony through each of the seasons of the year. And these seasons apply to everything that goes on with life. And specifically, as we're talking about here, we're talking about the 5 seasons of the writing process. So, for instance, in winter, it's where our little seeds germinate, story ideas, ideas for novels, exciting things we want to do. They sit and they germinate for a while. In spring, those seeds sprout into stories and outlines and visions of that whole story comes into view. So there's like this mad scramble, lots of writing, wonderful first drafts that come out during the season of spring. In summer, which we've been talking about in our last episode, and now burnout is a component of summer. We're talking about the summer is where you get in for the long haul. You're overviewing. You've taken your first and second and third drafts and you're pulling things apart and you're organizing and making sure things fit together and work smoothly. It's a maturation part of our process. And in harvest, which follows summer, this is the time where we have our completed manuscript or completed first, drafts. We can revel in the hard work we've done. We have something to show for our accomplishments and gratitude for all our hard work during fall. That's the season of letting go. This is where we put our editor hat on or hire a literal editor. Thank you, Gina, to come in and cleave away those things that do not serve our stories and do not serve our visions. It's the hard work of letting go of some of our precious stories that we love, but making our work streamline and to the point. And then we transition again back into winter. If you want to know more about it, we go into more detail. There'll be links on our website for the podcast.
Yeah, and I think you said you were going to put a summary, that we're going to have a summary sheet about the seasons.
Yes, we have a list, a summary sheet for all 5 seasons. There'll be an overview, and for each particular ones, if you click on that podcast, a link to that, we have the qualities and the notes and exercises for each of the seasons to help you stay in the season and make the most out of that particular part of your writing process. So now we're still in summer. We're going to talk about burnout, which is a big deal. I can't tell you how many people, writers and not, are struggling with this right now, not only just in their writing process, but in their personal lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big one right now.
It seems like it's so many people that I'm talking to, like you said, not just writers and not just um, in their writing activities, but in life in general. So I'm excited about this topic because this has been something that I have really struggled with over the course of this summer. For the listeners' reference, we're recording this near the beginning of August, and in the month of July, I I sort of did a step back because of feelings of burnout. Like most of us, I was not able to completely pull away from all of my duties and responsibilities, but severely cut back on them to sort of do a creative reset to get me hopefully beyond a stage of burnout. So I
Yeah.
wonder, for each of you, I'd love to know how does burnout manifest for each one of you all? What does it feel like to you? What does it look like for each one of you? Kimbu, you want to go first?
Yeah, it's interesting for me because burnout is very personal. It's like any other kind of emotional situation you go through, even though there are some universal aspects. For me, particularly, I describe it to others as drifting or listing in the Sargasso Sea, which the Sargasso Sea, if any of you aren't familiar with it, is a patch in the Atlantic, which is basically a massive seaweed patch, Sargasso. And boats that try to go through there are basically fighting their way through this seaweed blockage. And it's something to avoid at all costs, but sometimes you're just going to end up there because of the winds and the tide. And I feel that really reflects how it is for me because I can't really say that I know exactly what causes burnout in the sense of like there's one particular trigger. So
Mm-hmm.
usually for me, burnout is a cluster of things or is the result of a cluster of things, which can be trauma, stress, anxiety. I do suffer from clinical anxiety, so that's something I generally have to beat back with a stick, I think, as my papa would say. That's a tough one. But when I get into burnout, it's not simply that I don't care, which is more of a depression type of thing. Burnout is like you're trying to get somewhere. You're trying to sail through the sargasso. You're really trying, but you're just not getting anywhere, and you just
Hmm.
don't have the energy, and it's just too hot. It's just too. You're just exhausted, and so as hard as you try to set the sails or row or whatever you're doing, it's just you're just being pulled back all the time, constant sense of being pulled back and trapped. So
Mm.
that's, maybe I carried the metaphor a little too far, but I think
No,
it
no,
really
no, I don't
does.
think so.
It really does capture how I feel when I'm describing or talking about burnout to people. And, I'm not going to say it's cyclical, but certainly burnout is not a one and done thing. Like burnout
No.
for me is something that raises its ugly head on a regular basis. Maybe I don't experience it for a year or two, but then it'll come back, and I
Mm.
just have to. I'm still learning how to challenge that situation myself.
Yeah. Great, great. How about you, Melody?
Well, you put it perfectly, Kimbu, and talking about being in the Sargasso Sea and just kind of, I sometimes refer to it as trying to wade through potato salad, like, yeah, want to move, but progress is not going so good. And, you are also correct in that it's a complex situation and often starts long before we notice it and come to the end of where we're able to cope with those very things that we really want to do. I mean, you know, they call it burning the candle at both ends for a reason, and
Mm,
it shows up for me as a lack of passion for things that I love and want to do. And not only the passion, but the energy and the brain capacity to do it. I find it difficult to focus. Um, Normally, I can do complex tasks. I am a high functioning person, so I can go a long time into burnout or overwhelmed before I come to a stop and say, oops, it's time to deal with this. So even when it gets severe, I have a low tolerance for disruption. I can even have oversensitivity to light and sound and weather changes and
mm,
people talking. Just the least little thing can annoy me.
Mm.
So it is complex, and it's good to recognize the signs early, um, so we can
Yeah, not
intervene
very
on
good
our
at
own
that.
behalf. Yeah, right.
yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Gina. Like, well, and, Gina, I would like you mentioned that you took July off because you were dealing with burnout. What were the signs? I mean, what led you to that decision?
Well, I can relate to what Melody was saying about the brain fog, but what comes for me before the brain fog, well, let me back up. So, to me, burnout is the exhaustion that I feel after I have been completely overwhelmed by
Mm,
whatever, by all the things. And it starts to manifest in my body as I've tried to describe this before. It's a vibration. It's
mm,
definitely energy that feels like my body constantly feels like it's vibrating 24/7. I don't know any other way to explain it than that. And then the brain fog sets in, and I get um, sidetracked easily. I can't focus. Um, I just get into this sort of muddled mess sort of feeling. I love the Sargasso Sea analogy too. I can really relate to that sort of slogging through the thickness, the potato salad, if you will. Both of those are great, great descriptions of how I feel, but along with that sort of vibration that I described. Um, and I know that it's hard for any of us to like pinpoint what is the cause, like what is the trigger,
mm,
what sets us into burnout, because I do think that it is an accumulation of things. But one of the main contributing factors, even when we're doing I'll speak for myself. Even when I am doing all the things that I love, even when everything that I'm doing is related to my passion and my purpose and my why, when I forget self care, when I am taking care of all the other things and not myself, when I leave out that piece, I know that burnout is right around the corner. But I forget that. And so I get into the burnout. And then it's like, duh, what are you doing? What are you doing?
I just want to say real quick, like I think too that it's easy for us to get in that hamster wheel because the society we live in is so focused on productivity and doing more and hustling and stuff like that. So I think it makes sense. Like sometimes we just like, no, I just need to keep going and just
Yeah.
I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time to do yoga. I don't have time to go do my exercises.
Yep.
It's a harsh feedback loop.
Yeah. I don't have time to do other creative things that fill me up instead of
Mm.
deplete me. So when I say self care, there are those things that are on the surface, like, exercising, eating right, and those kind of things. But also just the little everyday things that bring us joy that we don't make time for when we are trying to be productive, trying to, contribute in whatever way we feel like we're called to contribute. I'm interested to hear from each of you how burnout, when you get to that point, affects your writing process.
What
Again,
writing
Kimberly, would you
process?
like to go
What?
first?
For me, basically a burnout. I guess burnout and depression do have some similarities in that a lot of things just stop. For me, my creativity just I get so frustrated in that Sargasso Sea, continuing that idea that I just man, writing becomes such a chore. It really loses its joy for me, and that's tragic.
Oh, and that's so sad. That is so, yeah,
Mm.
tragic. It is tragic. It's tragic for you personally, and it's tragic for those of us who are readers who don't get to experience your writing when you're not writing. So, avoid burnout. So, Melody, how does burnout affect your writing process?
Well, I notice that I get easily overwhelmed. Um, I we're in the beginning, so I'm in that spring phase, and I'm getting all excited about the storyline and my characters, and it's all blooming and blossoming and growing by leaps and bounds. I'm excited where it is and where it can go. Um, I lose all of that, and instead,
Mm,
when I think about all those things, I get very tired and I have to go take a 3 hour nap. Um,
Mm.
mm,
that's a
Mm.
good
Yeah.
for the productivity. So I get easily overwhelmed. Sometimes I can't see for the forest for the trees because I'm looking at all the things that need to be done. And again, my go-to is go take a nap when I see all the things. It often leads to some brain fog for me, and confusion and chaos ensues where I start one thing but I don't finish it, and then I go back and I start another thing and I don't finish it. So yeah, that basic lack of passion for my writing um, shows itself
yeah.
and just creativity in general.
Yeah. So
Mm.
I recognize everything that you both are describing in terms of my own effects on my writing process. I can't focus on things like character and plot and really getting into my story no matter how passionate I may have been about it in the past. I do find that I make the shift when I'm in burnout from my creative writing back to my journaling, and I think that's because the journaling is always sort of an anchor for me whenever I am in sort of an overwhelm, or even when I'm, seemingly doing well, things are moving along, but I've got a lot of pieces, parts, a lot of things to fit together. The journaling always kind of helps me untangle the mess in my brain. And so a lot of times when I'm feeling like I'm headed toward that burnout, if I lean on my journal and am honest with myself when I put words down on the page about what's going on in my head and my heart, then that will often help me get to whatever might have been that trigger that particular time in heading me toward the burnout so that I can then do something about it. Do
It's a
either of
really
you
good
journal?
suggestion. I hadn't considered journaling, but now that that's on the plate, I think I might put that there in the future when I'm looking at burnout, because I don't know, it just sounds like something that I like the way that it kind of flips the, flips things from trying to be creative to just kind of relaxing into your own self and your own
Mm-hmm.
being and finding the words there. That makes the
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And during that July creative reset that I did, one of the things that I did, and Kimber, you pointed me to this fellow, I started doing sketchbook journaling. I've always done just
Mm.
writing, just words, just the words. But for this, there was this one particular video from Sketchbook School, and we'll put a link to this in the show notes, that inspired me not only to use words, but to doodle and to draw in my journal. And it was interesting what came up for me. Some of the drawings were, just what I saw across the room at the moment, and were just giving me a moment of like relaxation, disconnection that I needed. Sometimes it was actually doodling a little drawing of something that had happened that day, or an element, that was part of my day. So I can go back now and look at some of those days and go, oh yeah, that happened that day. And on that day, you know, this happened. So that's been a lot of fun for me to do too. And it creates a creative crossover, which we've mentioned before. When you're a
Mm-hmm.
creative person and you have a particular discipline that you're working in, that sometimes it's a good idea to cross over and do something different. So the writing and the drawing together for me seems to work real well when I get to this burnout stage and need some sort of other creative outlet. So what about you Melody? Is there anything in particular that you do, or do you journal, or do something else when you've hit that burnout stage
Um,
besides nap?
I, I have a high pain. I have a high pain threshold. So sadly, I'm getting better at, but often I get to the crash phase, which is never pretty, and I need rest. I need to take a
Mm.
complete break
Mm-hmm.
from things. I may need to do a media fast like Gina did last month, which allows my brain
Mm-hmm.
to reset, to stop overwhelming myself with information and more information. Um, I try to pace myself. I go out in nature. I do things that don't require a lot from me personally. And so, in other words,
Mm.
be in a state of receiving. I can engage with my friends, which is always helpful and restorative. And we talk, interestingly enough, I can talk about my work and I can talk about my ideas and storylines versus, doing the work on the keyboard with them.
Mm.
But that also helps me get my creative juices flowing again and bring back some of my excitement. So
Mm-hmm.
that self-care is so important. And if we think, that when I get to the crash phase, then I can look back over and say, oh yeah, oh, I completed a book and got it into a print that took me 9 years. And then I went from there to a road trip up to the East Coast and back, the North Atlantic states. And then after that, I came back and I started a new job. And after that, we went into pandemic for 2.5
You left
years.
out that you moved twice.
I moved
Yeah, you
twice
moved
in that
twice.
time, exactly, and
Uh-huh.
and took
Uh-huh.
on another new job, and that required a lot of mental and emotional bandwidth. So yeah, of course I'm experiencing burnout. And when I get tired, my go-to is, when I feel overwhelmed or I see so much to do, is my thinking is, I need to work harder. I need
Uh-huh.
to do more instead of doing less and giving myself that space. And I always forget that my productivity goes down the more I push myself and try to
Hmm.
do more. When I give myself the time
Hmm.
and the breaks I need, productivity, creativity goes way up.
I do think that it's interesting that we forget, and you used the word forget, Melody. It's like, this is not the first time I've been burned out. So, am I not paying attention? How is it that I can get into that spin again? Why do we forget? So I'm sorry, Kimbu, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
Oh no, I was just going to comment on what Melody was saying, what you were saying about um, rest makes you more productive. Like that's scientifically proven. Like there's no that's not just oh I feel like that. Maybe that's actual fact. They've studied that especially meditation studies. People who meditate for 5 minutes in between doing complex tasks do better on the second task than people who say like keep their mind, keep working all the way through, go from one task right to the other, or just take a break and don't do meditation. It's like that's it's vitally important. And I'm really struck, Gina, by your comment of why do we forget?
Hmm.
Because as the intro says, we are ladies of a certain age. We're not fresh off the boat, as they might say. We've been through these things in life.
Hmm.
We know the signs. We know how it affects us, and yet there's there's this thing where you go through a bad situation, be it burnout or depression, and then you just kind of forget what it was like until it
Yeah.
comes around again, and then you're like, oh, hey, what? I'm so surprised. It's just like, what? Why do we forget? I don't understand that at all.
And we have these experiences. We have this, intellectual knowledge of scientific studies, and yet
And yet,
it still comes around again. And so that means we need tools to deal with this. We need to know how to
mm,
manage it. We need to know what it looks like, and we need to know how we can prevent it. So that is leading us into our discussion with Melody about the summer balances and imbalances. So, Melody, I'm going to pass it off to you to share with us what you have also shared in your book, Soul of the Seasons, about the season of summer and how we can deal with burnout.
Well, the season of summer, as I mentioned earlier, is this season of high productivity. There's a lot of things going on. And when we're healthy and balanced, we're able to oversee and complete all our projects, the ones we prioritized, with efficiency. And we also are able to manage our time and our energies wisely. We delegate well to others and allow people to do their jobs well. And this is the season when we bring all our visions we saw in spring into fruition. During this time, we mentioned this earlier, there's genuine warmth with laughter and play and storytelling and great sex. And we also have this,
yeah.
it's a whole podcast. And also during this time, we have this ability to separate um, what's needed from what's not needed efficiently. When we get imbalanced, of course, we lose this ability to oversee and bring our projects into fruition. And we talked about earlier, we have a lack of or an inappropriate expression of joy. We may crawl into sadness and be very somber, or we may laugh at all sorts of things, whether it's warranted or not. Um, we may feel loneliness and or a fear of being alone, which is a true concern with writers because our journey is a very solitary one. No one can write our work
Mhm.
but us, and that can lead to some sadness as well. We may, in our imbalance, we may need to control everything. We start micromanaging and hand stuff off to beta readers or editors, and then take it back and say, or tell them how they need to do their job, or even, and that expands out into our our daily life too, where we don't allow people to handle their portion of responsibility, and our thoughts and actions can become chaotic, and we feel like we have this lack of authority over our own work, that we don't have control over how we want to proceed or make things happen. We don't see ourselves as part of that, the center of that. Those, and we'll post a list on this. This should be on our webpage, connected with the summer too, because in
Mhm.
this way I can see when I'm getting into burnout if some of those imbalances are showing up in my life. If any of them start raising their little heads, that's my signal. I need to take a step back and do some self care. And the best antidote to these imbalances is living a passionate, juicy life filled with lots of joy and laughter and uh, great sex and fun. One more thing I wanted to add is the crux of also recognizing burnout, and when we go to any imbalance and we dig ourselves in deep and have to crawl out again, is we stop paying attention to our bodies, and we disconnect from our bodies and from our intellectual, emotional, psychic selves. So we have
Mm.
created distance from that. That's how we forget.
Mm. So, one of the things that you said, Melody, that really resonated with me when you were talking about the imbalances, and that summer is looking at what's needed and what's not needed. And I know that for me, that was something I was really drawn to focus on when I did my creative reset. Because as we've talked about before, creatives have a lot of ideas, and our tendency is to want to do all of those ideas. They're our babies. We want to be able to dive in with enthusiasm and execute on all of them.
Oh,
Um,
heck yeah.
and we can do all of them. We just can't do all of them at the same time. And we tend to try to do that, or at least I do. And so I really had to be a little bit brutal with myself this past month, and I'm still kind of in process of this, taking a close look at what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Is this something that I need right now? Or is this something that I can let go of? Is this something that I can let go of now, but come back to later at another time? But really, when you said what's needed and what's not needed, I wrote that down in that moment because that really resonated with
Mm.
What really resonated with me, kind of jumping off of that, was, and I think there's a relation between what resonated with Eugene and what resonated with me, was the idea of feeling out of control of the things that you're invested in, that you're working on, are, um, just overwhelming because you're not in control of them. You're not, the imbalances that, things are spinning and you don't have nothing spinning on task or whatever you want to describe it. And to me, that's a strong indicator of burnout for me, because I just feel like everything's going in all sorts of different directions, and I can't, like tossing a lasso and trying to catch a wild horse. It's just going off. And I'm just like standing there with my hand held out. Wait, come back. But it does, because the reason for that is, I think, comes back to what resonated with you, which was that, what to keep and what to let go. If you're trying to corral everything, then it's kind of like, sand through your fingers. The tighter you hold, the more sand will go through. And
me.
and so it's interesting how those imbalances, it's not just one imbalance. I think they're all related, which is something you say all the time, Melody. I know that's not exactly shocking news, but it does strike me as you were going over those things. Those were the things that kind of stuck with me.
Absolutely. Separating, what's needed from what's not is a really important function. It's an important function in the body, and it's important to us mentally and emotionally and spiritually. It gets really exciting in spring and the beginning of summer, and all these fun stuff ideas start popping. Because I don't know about you all, but when I get a story idea, a bunch of other story ideas spin off from it. And not only that,
Mm-hmm.
ideas about other projects. And like the creativity is high and I get really excited. It's like standing at a smorgasbord and, trying to put all of it on your plate the first time through. Um, so
Or all of it
the
in your mouth
phrase,
at once.
yeah. Wait, I got a little room. I got a little room. I can put that meatball in there. Exactly. Biting off more than you can chew comes to mind in that. Um,
Yes, for
Yeah, I have
sure.
no idea what that feels like. Absolutely no
yeah. And
idea.
so that's a really huge thing that you did, Gina, was sort through that and take an honest look. I fell into a really difficult time. Oh gosh, this was probably 20, 30 years ago, where I couldn't physically, health wise, I couldn't physically do even some of the very basic things I normally did. So I really had to say, what is it that I can manage today at this time? And um, scaling that back. Gina, you helped me with this also during one of the revision phases, because it seemed overwhelming, especially after I had done like 12,978 previous revisions, and you gave me a new list of like, I think I told you I said some bad words um, about that, um, but you gave me some great advice and said, don't go over the whole thing. Go in, get it done, get out.
Yeah.
Focus on what's important right there, what's necessary, and leave the rest. So that was really helpful.
Thank you for that reminder. Focusing on what's important and what's necessary in the moment. And when I said that this, what's needed and what's not needed resonated with me, I realized in listening to the two of you that I was thinking of it in terms of the things that I do, like what do I do that I need to do or that I could do later or that I could completely let go of. But it's also more deeply, I think, about what we really need in terms
Mm,
of um, nurturing ourselves, in terms of recognizing the things that we can either do or ways that we can be that fill us up in a way that we can then do the things that we feel like we need to do. Does that make any sense?
It
I think it
absolutely
does
does.
because, yeah, what I'm thinking of is that a lot of times we define ourselves as who we are by what we do. And I think we
Exactly.
need that is the reminder that what we do isn't who we are, and we need to remember that who we are informs what we do, and what we do informs who we are. But those things are constructs really that we create through circumstance and history and all that sort of stuff. But we we are who we are as a creative creature, going through the creative process. And just because we don't do this thing or do this other thing doesn't define us completely. Which is something I really get caught up in. Like if I'm going to be this type of person, then I need to do this kind of thing, and
Yeah.
that's just not true. That's just not true.
So, so what that makes me think about is something that you all know I've struggled with perfectionism. because one of the signs of perfectionism, and I'm wondering now what the relationship between perfectionism and burnout might be, because one of the things that perfectionists tend to do is should themselves. It's like, I should do this, I should do that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a tendency toward comparisonitis. So those are characteristics of perfectionism, but I'm wondering how those sorts of things may get layered in and interwoven into the other things that lead us toward burnout and contribute to that. Either of you have a perspective on that?
Wow, that's really hitting the nail on the head, because I was thinking as you were talking about it as well, is the self created stressors by all the shoulds that I place on myself.
Oh.
I should be doing this better. I should be doing more. I should have completed this by now. That just piles on and creates sort of this energetic weight, if you will, to my load that already feels bigger than I can handle. When I had that difficult period before, I really had to pare down what is essential for my health and well-being for today. And when you really do that, there is surprisingly few things that are absolutely essential to have to get done at any particular time. There's a lot of things we
Mm-hmm.
think we need to get done, but very few things are
Should.
true emergencies. Absolutely have
Mm-hmm.
to get done.
So you talked about that piling on of the shoulds, that it
Mm.
just weighs you down. And so I'm wondering then, do you think that piling on of all those shoulds contributes to that sense of a lack of control, which is then the sign of summer imbalance?
Absolutely. It's just like a vicious cycle. And the
Mm-hmm.
more that I do the shoulds, the more that I feel overwhelmed, the less that I do.
Mm-hmm.
The less I'm able to do, the less I'm able to take on. So yeah, it's a cycle. To me, putting self-care on my calendar as a regular routine. I don't always have strict adherence to it, but when I put it on my calendar, it reminds me to do that, prevents me from getting to the place of overwhelm in the beginning. And really leading a more balanced life is going to prevent overwhelm and burnout in your writing process. I mean, if you do that in all areas of your life, it will show up as value in your writing, in the writing process
Can
for
you,
you.
Melody, can you highlight for us again, what does balanced summer? We've talked about a lot about the imbalances. Tell us, uh, what does that balanced summer look like? You've mentioned joy, which definitely resonates with me. So what else is there?
Well, there is the ability to oversee and complete projects efficiently. There is a sense of connectedness and community. That's one thing we talked about in our last podcast. We have
Mm-hmm.
important regular communication with not only our friends, but our community. We allow our community to support us. We share our visions with them. We do that through storytelling sometimes. And they, in turn, support us in our journey. Also, community is where we can share laughter, play, uh, fun, and joy. And we also see, like we mentioned before, separating the pure from the impure, what's necessary from what's not, and the ability to move through delegating things well. Um, Not micromanaging, but overseeing things and allow others to handle their own responsibilities.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground in the moments that we have had here together. They seem like moments. It's actually been almost 45 minutes. There's still so much for us to cover on this topic, ladies. What do you think of maybe another future episode on burnout?
I
What do you
think that would be
think?
great. I think that
Yeah.
would be great. I know Melody has a worksheet we're going to have with the episode, this episode, but I think it would be great for our listeners and for us if we could go over some of the strategies and talk about how to deal with. And as Melody, I know you've mentioned a couple of times, what does the recovery process look like? I think that would
Yes.
be a great episode.
Yeah, I know for myself, I'm particularly interested in making that bridge from if I recognize that I'm in this imbalance and I know that what balance looks like intellectually, okay, how do I get from here to there? And so I
Mm.
think that that's a whole nother episode, creating the right circumstances for us to develop that balance.
Yes, and how we can prevent it in the future as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to thank you, Melody, for sharing this wisdom that you have, this perspective that you have, that we're able to not only apply to our writing lives, but to apply to our lives as a whole, giving us these insights and awareness and resources for us to be able to create the lives that we want to have. So thank you
Mhm.
for that. Very appreciative.
You're welcome. Happy people make happy writers.
Yes, yes, indeed. So that wraps it up for this episode, and we will see you the next time and ask you to comment. If you go to our website, aroundthewriterstable.com, there is an area for you to comment on our page. If you have any questions, if you have any ideas for future episodes, anything that you would like us to know, any feedback on our podcast, we would love to hear from listeners. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us around the writer's table. Please feel free to suggest a topic or a guest by emailing info@aroundthewriterstable.com. Music provided with gracious permission by Langtree. A link to their music is on our homepage at aroundthewriterstable.com. Everyone here around the writer's table wishes you joy in your writing and everyday grace in your living. Take care until next time.